and I think we'll begin. And as always, the way, at least I've been taught to study Torah, is to figure out how to bring it into your life. Because Torah is Melashon Hara'ah. Torah is not just a great, complicated book, but something it's a guiding book. It's a guiding force. The original self-help, maybe, as you would say it, but a little more complex. Besides for the halachic interpretations that come out, you have also the Kabbalist Hasidic insights. It's all rooted based on the 5 books of Moses. And this week's Torah portion, we have Beshalach. We have a real doozy, as they say. One of the most wild experiences that even non-believers or people who don't know much about the Bible have heard. If you ask your average person on the street, what do you know about the Bible? Or what's the most outrageous thing you know about the Bible? Chances are that splitting of the sea is right up there. So, for example, just the fact that the most practiced experience in the Jewish calendar is a Passover Seder. And of course, we have the splitting of the seas there as well, which of course is coming from this week's Torah portion. So it actually has its own name, this Shabbat. It's called Shabbat Shira. It's a time of singing. And there's a lot that went on over there, a lot of midrashic interpretations and commentaries that are all wild and interesting. But there is a question before we get to the interesting part of the splitting of the sea. First, I also want to mention that tonight begins, there's 4 different Rosh Hashanahs. We are all familiar with the main one, which is on Rosh Hashanah, which is, the one that we go to shul in, or back in the other day. And they also have what's called Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is the 15th of Shvat, which is the Rosh Hashanah for the trees. By a raise of hands, have you heard of Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanot or Tu B'Shvat? Raise your hand, just so I have an idea of what's going on. Okay, so for those who haven't, you have some homework to do after the class. You can go right on Google or Sefaria or any of these places, Chabad.org, probably the best site that I know of, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the holiday of Rosh Hashanah with regards to the trees, Tu B'Shvat. So the fact that we are right now in the portion of Beshalach, and we have the splitting of the sea, which is the big one, and we also have Tu B'Shvat. Towards the end of the class, we'll try to bring it all together and see how that all meshes into hopefully a guiding point for all of us. So L'chaim, we'll begin. This coffee, no worries. I'm not going too far anyways. All right. So the first thing we want to discover is in the name of the portion, there's always something very special in it. That's why it has its name. There's only 52 portions and there's only 52 names of the portions. So whatever the portion is, like for example, next week we'll get into it for those who want to join us, as Yisro, and that's the giving of the Torah. And it begs the question, why is Yisro the name of the portion? Maybe the name of the portion should have been the giving of the Torah. You think that's bigger than Yisro, who was a convert, who practiced every sort of idol worship in the world. Yes, at the end he becomes Moses' father-in-law, which is a big deal. But to have your own portion, it's like, the top 50, the top 50 in the NBA, the top 50 in the NFL. It's only so many 50, there's only so many people that can make that list. So the fact that someone makes that list or some name makes that list is obviously a very significant purpose and a significant reason. So this week's Torah portion is called Beshalach. Now, Beshalach means to send out. But who was sending out? Beshalach over here refers to Pharaoh. Vayhi Beshalach Paro Esa'am. That's how the verse starts off in this week's Torah portion, that Pharaoh sends out this nation. So why are we giving emphasis on Pharaoh sending out the Jews? Maybe we should have called this week's Torah portion Splitting of the Sea. Shira. We call it Shabbat Shira. It has another name to it because it's such a significant Torah portion. But the actual name of the Torah portion that we read is called Beshalach. So that's a good question that we'll have to come to as well. Well, let's start off with that question, and let's see if we can knock it down, and then we'll get into some other questions and come back to it. The Hasidic masters say that the reason why we refer to Pharaoh's expression of sending out the Jews, Beshalach, is, first of all, we have to ask ourselves, based on that question, it's almost derogatory. It's as if the Jews didn't want to leave. So he had to send them out. Once he allows them to go free, why would he have to send them out? They should be running for the hills. They're done. 210 years of slavery is enough. So obviously there's more going on to this. It's not so simple that it means that Pharaoh's not. What it is really it's setting a precedent and setting a tone as the Jews are just about to leave and gain their freedom. You see, most of us and most people in the world, and especially the Jews at that time, when we do something or when we need to do something, it's out of functionality. We need to get up in the morning. We have a job. We need to show up on time. We have a Zoom class. Shabbos is coming. Even the most religious of them, they're preparing. There's a certain level of diligence and functionality that goes. So obviously, if you are a slave for 210 years, you pray to God or you do whatever you can that you should be free. Why? Because no one wants to be a slave. That's functional. That's not necessarily passion. Passion is once you are free already, now you want to discover what you really want. You know, everybody knows they don't want to be beholden to someone else. No one wants to be a slave to a pharaoh. But once you take off the shackles and once you let them free, now what do you want? Now, what's your real worth? What's your real passion? Where do you want to go? You know, it's like people ask themselves a question like, if they won the lotto, what would they do? Would they still keep their job? You know, that's always a big question. Lotto's hit recently to close to $1 billion. These conversations start to percolate up again. What does that mean? So most people see finance as a certain limitation. But if I had no limitations, what would I be? What would I want to do? Until then, okay, there's certain things that I need to do with my life in order to achieve a certain amount of wealth so I can have a certain functional level that works for me, for my standard, my style. So once the Jews were freed, they began a new passion of what it is that they wanted in life. It wasn't just about leaving Pharaoh anymore. They now entered into a whole new space, and we'll talk about that as we get to the splitting of the sea, the manna, the whole experience in the desert, the receiving of the Torah, becoming partners with God, with the Creator, with the Infinite. That's a whole nother party. That's not just, I want to leave my jail cell. This is a whole nother, attitude in terms of how to affect and change the entire world. That creates a tremendous amount of passion. So we say that compared to where the Jews were going, it was Beshalach. That's what we want to say, is that Pharaoh sent them out compared to where they were going. Of course, they wanted to leave, but compared to the passion that they had for the goals that they wanted to achieve and being God's partner in making this world a better place, you couldn't compare the idea of leaving. So that would be the tone setter in terms of how they're going to be. So that's where they were merited to all these miracles. Like even in the splitting of the sea, if you read the commentaries, it's completely wild. Maybe we'll touch upon some of those soon. And so when we think of it in those terms, maybe then we could have a certain appreciation of why we call it Beshalach. He sends them out, not that it's derogatory, but this is the beginning of the impetus of truly finding their freedom, of not just leaving or wanting to leave because you don't like the shackles. The shackles are gone. And now what happens? There's another also idea on this Torah portion is, what is the greatest goal in terms of advancing one's own spiritual journey? Is that we take the things that slow us down and they work for us. It's called transformation, okay? Or transcendence. So Pharaoh was the one that was holding them back. Now, Vayhi Beshalach Paro, so now Pharaoh is sending them out. Pharaoh is now working for them. It's not just that he lets them go, he's pushing them out. He's already changed his tone. He's changed completely. He's now working for them, so to speak. So that's a real level of the beginning of the transformation of where the Jews are headed and what's going to happen to them. Okay. Now we're going to get to the next level. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the journey. So now that they left, Pharaoh sends them out. There's a lot of commentary and ideas. I can't share them all, but I want to share the idea of the splitting of the sea. Why is the splitting of the sea so integral to the Jewish story, to the leaving of Exodus? I went to Disneyland with my kids. They even have, part of the exhibition, and it's a small world. They have, this idea of splitting the sea. How did it become so big? Why did it become so big? What was God's purpose for it? What was the reason for it? I mean, there was no Ubers running around then in the desert. They splitting of the Red Sea, that was the only way they can get to Mount Sinai. If the wings of birds came by, like a Spielberg movie, and they got on, that would maybe be less crazy. Why do we have to go to such crazy extremes of such a wild miracle to be somewhat of the precursor in order to receive the Torah? So it's, it's a pretty, and so much so that everybody knows the story of the splitting of the Red Sea. And there's a lot on it. There's a lot of commentaries. Just Google splitting of the Red Sea, go to Chabad.org. You can educate yourself. It's endless. If you want to do a deep sea driving, the splitting of the sea. And what happens before the splitting of the sea? There's different factions and they fight and they argue. And one says we should go back. And one says we should commit suicide until one guy jumps in, Nachshon ben Aminadav, and then the sea splits. And as a sea splits, they go to 12 different tribes, have 12 different channels within the sea. And as we'll read on this week's Torah portion, and the wall stood straight on the right and on the left. An elaborate, detailed experience of 600,000 primary souls, 2 million altogether, walking through what was at one point a wetlands, and now it's dry. It says even more so that the miracles were so wild that the ground that they went on, you would think it'd be muddy. No, it was dry where the Jews went. And then afterwards, it talks about as the Jews make it almost to the end, and the Egyptians are following them, then the sea washes back up and drowns all the Egyptians out. What's this whole thing with the sea? Why couldn't they have a boat? How hard is it, find a boat? Wouldn't it be easier? A little bit, maybe less traumatic? So obviously, we know everything in Torah has multi-layered and multi-reasons. And I'm going to share with you some teachings from some of the great Hasidic masters about the splitting of the sea. It says that they entered the sea on dry land. That's from the verse in this week's Torah portion. The Talmud has a tremendous quote, and it says, every creature exists on lands. For every creature that exists on land has a counterpart in the sea. Okay? Again, for everything that exists on dry land, there's a counterpart in the sea. We know the world is 2/3 water and 1/3 dry land. So it's easy to conceive that certainly there's room and space for that. So the Kabbalists call it something called Alma de Iskasia and Alma de Iskaya, the world that's hidden and the world that's revealed. Two different worlds. There are things that are obvious. Right now, even though there's Zoom, I can see you can see me if you want. And that's revealed. And there's hidden. There's stuff going on behind the scenes, things that I think about, perhaps you think about. And then there's always two different faces of a coin, things that are revealed and things that are hidden. Things that I share, thoughts that come through my mind and outside my mouth that now you hear, and maybe thoughts that never come out. Maybe that sometimes I'm aware of them, sometimes I'm not. Alma de Iskalia, Alma de Iskasha, revealed and hidden. Well, our world is also comprised of revealed and hidden. The dry land would be obviously the revealed part. The wetlands, ocean. If you ever got a chance to take a sea voyage, it's fascinating. It's extremely humbling. You don't know how deep it goes sometimes, even with all the sonar equipment. And there's lots of stuff going on there that we'll never know about, species that we'll never even discover. So that's the hidden world. So we say there's actually two aspects of our personalities, as I've been explaining, is hidden and revealed. And the difference is as follows. You see, in the ocean, a fish, for example, can never fool itself in thinking that it can be on the dry land. It knows it's constantly immersed in the water because once it leaves, it'll die. So it knows that its life, its terrain, its existence needs to be always in the ocean, in the water. But there are species that are on the land that sometimes are hidden. They create burrows. They are not visible for long periods of time, could be several months, several seasons. And they can fool themselves in thinking that they don't need to be on this, dry land. They can fool themselves in thinking that it's their own existence. The fish never fools himself. The fish never always knows that it needs its environment and its surroundings in order to exist. As soon as you take a fish out of water, it jumps and wants to go back. But the human being doesn't quite have the same sort of loyalty or overt dependence on the world that it's in. Of course, it needs the oxygen. Of course, it needs trees, and we'll get to that real soon. And it needs a lot of things, but it's not always aware of that. It's not always conscious of that. And it may walk an entire lifetime absolutely believing and thinking that it doesn't need this. So it's a higher level of consciousness, so to speak, between the aquatic system and the earth, the dry land. So stay with me. I'll bring it all home, I promise. but I think you can see where I'm going with this. So what happens? Welcome, Reb Ruvain. So we're just talking about the power of the splitting the sea and why this is such a critical miracle and why it had to happen. So what does God do? God says, I'm going to show you, and I want you to experience what it means when I reveal the world which is hidden. And I want you to experience it. I want you to walk through it. I want you to realize that it's possible for you to absolutely immerse yourself in this world that's normally covered, Alma de is Gasya, this hidden world, and you can still find existence there. You can still be at yourself. It was a very, very unique experience that they had. We know that Moses, his name is what? Moshe. Why is it called Moshe? Because he was drawn from water. Water is, again, reflective of the spiritual experience. And that's why he's called Moshe. We know that when Jacob blesses his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons, what does he say to them? I want you to swim like the fish in the midst of the land. To have a certain consciousness and know that you're always in the spiritual cocoon guiding you, even though you're on the land. And in order for us to really be God's partner in this world by receiving the Torah, he first needs to take us through the splitting of the sea and showing us that it's possible for even us to be able to see a world that sometimes seems hidden, sometimes seems a little bit, covered. We don't always understand all the secrets, but to know that there's a navigational experience by a higher power all the time is what can completely anchor us into a much deeper, richer existence. So we all sort of, to speak, had to go through this mikveh process, although we didn't have to get wet because it was dry, the walls were on both sides. And that's when we go ahead and have this experience of having a peek, so to speak, into this world that's hidden. And finally, on this idea, and then we'll go to Tu B'Shvat and bring it together. Finally, it says that when will the era of Mashiach come? When will the redemptive state come? Or what is that supposed to look like? What is that experience? I know it's weird and it sounds, but the fact is, no matter what shul you sing is Oseh Shalom B'Romav. When you sing that song, you sing She'ebana, Shema Yisrael. All these things lead to a world of utopian era, a world of redemptive era. And what does it say there? It says in Isaiah, it says, Umal ha'aretz deya es Hashem, kamayim layom mechasim. Umal ha'aretz, and it will fill up the world. Deya es Hashem, with the knowledge of God. Kamayim layom mechasim, just as the water covers over the seabed. So when we get into an experience that we can start to see the world, not just for its physical or ability that's hiding from us, but when we can able to see it with those submarine, sort of speak, ability where we can see through the water and see what's going on around us and recognize for everything we see, there's something, for everything that's created, there has to be a creator by definition. And when we start to live our lives like that, that's when we start to experience the splitting of the Red Sea, even several thousand years later. And that's what Hashem wants to do to the Jewish people. He says, not only I'm taking you out of freedom, I'm going to show you, I'm going to roll back the tape, so to speak, or pull back the curtain, as they say, and show you how things really operate. And that's why water is so integral to the experience and splitting of the Red Sea. Now, I want to do a quick tie into Tu B'Shvat, and then I'm going to have Reuven take over. Tu B'Shvat, as we know, is the Rosh Hashanah for the trees. And even though there's no fruits growing on outside, like why are we celebrating the trees? Maybe we should wait till they're actually picking the fruits off the trees. And we say something very interesting over here, that while the fruits aren't visible and growing, but below the surface the sap is rising, the life force begins to ascend from the earth to the trunk and then the fruits. Then trees are preparing to unleash their inner reserves and shower us with magnificent buds and blossoms. It may be that things look desperate and bleak. Still, the inner dimensions of the trees are building up for the renewal. For whatever reason, the rabbis decided this is the point between, not necessarily that you get to go ahead and take a bite out of the apple, but where movement starts to begin, that even though we don't see it. And so we talk about the Rosh Hashanah of trees really represents our ability to recognize something greater than just what meets the eye, but where it's coming from. Kind of similar to the splitting of the Red Sea. By recognizing fruits, by eating fruit from the tree, and we have this special meaning, we are connecting to a higher power, a seed that sometimes doesn't appear like dirt, but ultimately it can grow into the ground, and from there can come a tree, from their branches, from their fruit, etc. One last idea about the Tu B'Shvat, and you can see already the tie-in between what is hidden and what is revealed, starts to reveal itself through Tu B'Shvat. That's an immediate connection between the splitting of the sea and the holiday. But I saw something also that from the Kabbalists, I think it was from Rabbi Isaac Luria. He talks about that a tzaddik is compared to an inverted tree. What does it mean an inverted tree? His roots are in heaven, okay? And he slowly gets powered, so to speak, powered down here. And the fruits he gives off here into the world. Think of a tree upside down, right? So in many, many ways, that's really what all of us can try to accomplish and recognize, just as a physical tree is able to grab its source and its nourishments from the physical ground in order to give off fruits in our physical experience above surface, we all can also tap into a higher place of our spiritual nutrients in order to build ourselves up so that we can go ahead and share our own fruit with each other. Anytime we share Torah with each other, every time we listen to something, we're benefiting. There's a fruit that's being digested, not just by ourselves, but somewhere else. Obviously, this is very layered stuff, and procreation obviously is the more obvious one, but we want to talk about there is fruit that's being created, but just simply by sharing Torah with each other. So may we merit to really, I'll conclude by a blessing, may we merit to walk through the splitting of the sea, recognize how the navigation of the mysterious of God's ways. May we prepare to receive the Torah by next week. May we make the world a better place. May we see that even though things seem a little bleak, but there's still something that's brewing under the surface. And let us pray that it continues to push itself out completely so that we can benefit from this amazing, wonderful world that Hashem has given us. Everybody get vaccinated. Let's get out there and party soon. L'chaim, everybody. Happy Rosh Hashanah.